I'm grateful to the Noble Lord the Minister for his introduction, as there are many things within these documents to praise. They set out a positive direction for future energy infrastructure, which broadly align with clean power by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Although I, and I'm sure many others, welcome a whole system approach to energy infrastructure planning, delivery has remained fragmented. Let's hope, to coin a phrase, that the wind might now change. I have just come in from the mass climate lobby outside in Parliament Square. I'm not usually someone who joins in such events, but for me, the Climate Coalition and the great many people who are raising this vital issue of climate change and nature loss, because it seems to be slipping down the political agendas, is vitally important for us to hear. One of the aims of the coalition is to cut bills, back UK jobs and secure a greener, fairer future for all. Another is to restore nature to create a safer and healthier future. With these aims very fresh in my mind from the crowd outside, I want to address my remarks around three areas. First, the cost of connection and the cost of district heating networks, especially for those organisations that create the warp and weft of community life. Secondly, the capacity of the grid to receive the quantity of renewable energy we need produced. And thirdly, mitigating the impact of infrastructure projects on people, nature and landscapes. Any approach to electricity network infrastructure must include the entire community which is affected, or may be able to be the producer of energy. That includes our businesses, our places of worship, our community centres, sports clubs and town halls, schools and homes. Frustratingly, though, the cost of upgrading the connection to a low-voltage cable can be a huge barrier. One church in the diocese I serve, St Margaret's in Lowestoft, has been quoted £100,000 to upgrade their connection, and so that they can then move away from fossil fuel heating. Another, St Mary's Church in King's Lynn, has been given two quotes by Eastern Power Networks, one at £90,000, the other at £130,000. Our churches and other community assets, particularly in rural areas which need upgrades, are also part of wider communities and villages which also need upgrading. Now, many of our churches are blessed with large south-facing roofs, ideal for generating electricity, as is now happening on the roof of King's College Chapel in Cambridge and in many other places. But if churches could have easier and cheaper ways to connect onto the grid alongside other community buildings, not only could they move away from fossil fuels, but they could also become generators of solar energy and provide this to their local communities. I was pleased to see local energy generation included in the Great British Energy Bill, and I hope that can be built upon. But I fear that the costs will not make it possible in many, many places. So I ask the Noble Lord the Minister what support His Majesty's Government might make available, or how they might put pressure on companies providing the connections so that community organisations who wish to change from oil and gas to renewable electricity or feed into the grid are not prohibited from doing so by exorbitant cost. I was also pleased to see mention of heat networks in EN1, although I again see cost as being a large barrier to those who wish to join the network, and this does need to be tackled. To come closer to this place, Project Swan is a London district heating network that aims to provide sustainable heating from renewable energy sources such as waste heat from the Thames and the London Underground, to Church House Westminster, to Westminster Abbey, to government offices in Great Smith Street. It seems, though, that the costs for Church House alone have rocketed from initial estimates back in February of £2 million now to £3.5 million. and this project becomes no longer affordable. Meanwhile, other organisations within the catchment area are pulling out. If we wish for district heat networks to play a larger part in our energy infrastructure, I asked the Minister how he might suggest that a funding package or mechanism could be put in place to enable these to be more affordable for a range of partners. My Lords, moving to my second point about the grid in the east of England not being capable of handling the quantities of electricity which we hope can be generated offshore, there is a risk that renewable energy production will stall due to the lack of grid capacity. We have a situation where grid infrastructure is still being developed reactively based on project applications rather than a longer-term systems need. So I hope that the Noble Lord, the Minister, would agree with me that we need to build and to move to a build ahead of need model. Is there any consideration, I wonder, being given to embedding legal obligations for delivery bodies and regulators to plan infrastructure based on forecasted clean energy demand? Of course, we also need to have solar as standard, I would argue, on new build houses, and use the enormous acreage on warehouses and industrial units to generate more electricity. We're missing a trick, I would say, by not encouraging as much energy production as can be achieved as near as possible to its use. My Lords, in making my third point, I'd like to acknowledge the impact that this infrastructure development, particularly during the building phase, can have on local communities and on nature. Currently in North Norfolk, we have linear swathes of land cleared for 3 underground cabling routes, each the width of a 3-lane motorway. 2 are north-south, connecting between Weybourne and Norwich, and the third is east-west from Haysborough to Necton, connecting Norfolk's offshore wind turbines. So I was pleased to see in EN5 mention being made of how in establishing these linear connections, there needs to be a greater sense of care around reconnecting important habitats, green corridors, biodiversity stepping stones, but also not only for nature, but also for people, in reinstating public footpaths and cycleways and ways to get people to connect and be outdoors in nature. So that is to be welcomed. But how will it really happen in reality? You know, in putting in these linear cabling, often ancient hedgerows have to be removed. You know, how can it be done in such a way to restore some of these habitats that are being removed? The Noble Lord Howell of Guildford mentioned pylons. National Grid has plans for a pylon route which will march across 180 kilometres from Norwich to Tilbury, only part of it underground when it crosses the Debham Vale area of outstanding natural beauty. I would urge that cabling the section crossing the Waveney Valley should also be undertaken. However, if underground cabling was used for any new National Grid transmission lines as default, this would help to ensure less harmful long-term impacts for residents, for the environment, for settings of heritage assets, for tranquility, and for the countryside. Would the Noble Lord, the Minister, agree with me that to have an effective long-term strategy for the power network, it is essential that these 1960s kind of lowest cost solutions are no longer the default setting? But overall, my Lords, these national policy statements are part of facing the challenge of climate change and providing clear direction for planners and developers working on electricity networks infrastructure. But this does need to be achieved in such a way that people and place, nature and landscape can be protected and also thrive as we make the vital transition to non-carbon burning energy sources a success.